Revenue was front and center because all we cared about was becoming as big as we could at that time.
Capitalism.
Capitalism.
In its pure form.
Pure capitalism.
Purely.
And again, we attracted people that were drawn to that.
100%.
It was authentic for all of us.
It was.
You know?
And it was about building a big business. That was our mission, right? And changing trajectories,
We were inherently
changing lives.
competitive, and that's how we treated it. Was this is a competition, and we're going to win, and we're going to figure out how to win.
So today we're talking to Blake Murray, co-founder and CEO of Divvy. Tyler and I both worked at Divvy, so this has been one that we've been excited to kind of extrapolate the learnings. For those of you who aren't familiar with the story, it's relevant, I think. As far as I know, Divvy was the fastest revenue grower in the history of the state, and one of the fastest growers in the country, and like all of startup land. Raised a lot of money. Things happened very quickly. It was a very cool success story. And we got to be there. Tyler ran product, I ran revenue, and we got to see Blake up close and personal. So getting to talk to him a little bit removed from that experience and pull out those learnings is something that we're really excited to share with everybody.
Yeah, the hope is it feels a lot more friendly, congenial, a lot of good stories, and you guys will enjoy it. So thanks for listening in. Blake, for those who don't know the Divvy story, those who may not be familiar with how it started, take us back to the idea, how you came up with it, and Sterling may even ask you to go back further than that, but let's start there. How did you start Divvy?
Honestly, I don't think my story was too dissimilar from a lot of eventual businesses that become big and have a big outcome, meaning that I wasn't sitting there twiddling my thumbs trying to think of what's going to be big and what's going to work. I was in the midst in the stressful environment of trying to operate a small business myself. And it was during that process, about probably 6, 7, 8 months into it, where we had all the hopes and dreams of the world of being successful and creating this cash flowing business. It went sideways. It went sideways in a pretty terrifying way. Long story short, it was during probably about a month-long process of diving into trying to diagnose why it went bad so quickly, where I started to have an inkling of what was at least the core problem to me first. And then obviously it built and got bigger. And the core problem to me was I couldn't get a source of truth right now, like right then when I was looking at it, of what is the financial health of my business. It was a process that was complex and convoluted to try to get data that gave me information, either information that gave me peace of mind or that, gave me bad news. I couldn't get it. I just couldn't get that snapshot. And what I arrived at was that we had financial software, but then we also had banks that we worked with. And it was kind of the classic chasm story, is that there is this massive gap, likely in software performance, that existed between where we held our money in the banks and then the software that we were using that was supposed to give us insight and visibility into how we were performing financially. And that made no sense to me. The real insight, and probably the aha moment that I had after diagnosing that problem, of the kind of the insight of ubiquity of, oh, this isn't just a me thing. This isn't just my problem. But this is really everyone that has built a small business and had to manage a payroll and manage a staff have dealt with this also. And it was the fear. And it was the fear that keeps you up at night of, how am I going to make payroll? How are we going to finally turn a profit? What are we going to do to generate new leads that turns new tables, that turns it into the ecosystem that we wanted? That fear is absolutely ubiquitous, and you can whittle it down to, do we have enough money to operate? Like, that is the question that businesses ask themselves constantly. Do we have enough money to operate and survive? And my belief was that had I had the information in real time, not just the visibility, but had I had tools then, that I could have made more direct changes to the business that could have had a positive impact and kind of turn the tides in our favor, to flip the script. And that led then to an exploration as a non-developer, a non-technologist, but somebody that likely has an irrational belief in themselves, from a confidence perspective in terms of solving problems. I believed that the problem was big. Again, it had both depth and breadth, but that I could solve it. And it sparked a series then of the classic late nights and doing diligence. I found myself reading API documentation of Visa and MasterCard. I had no idea what an API was before, but I just allowed my brain to go into rabbit holes to try to figure out, is there something that technically existed? And there wasn't. And is this technically even feasible? And I say feasible as even probably a weaker form of possible, but can this theoretically exist of creating software in an experience where the bank then and the software are one and the same, alleviating a lot of that fear and giving me control, visibility, actual tools and mechanisms to drive financial change in my organization. And so that was the kind of the birth of Divvy. What maybe was a little bit different, and certainly was different from a lot of my experiences of kind of being an idea guy and trying to figure out what I want to work on or be passionate about, was I was investing money, legitimate money, into this idea within 2 weeks. Like, it was the insights were almost my own version of shock and awe.
And you hadn't done that with other ideas? This is the first time where you're pouring money into it?
I'd had many, I think, like lots of us, where you go to trusted sources, to kind of the classic, to a dad or a friend. You get in brainstorm mode and kind of volley back and forth on some of the ideas, and ultimately convince yourself, like, nah, that's not it. That's not going to get as big or as far as you want, or it's not as big of a problem. And every time I thought deeply about this, it was the inverse. It got bigger in my mind. The opportunity got bigger and the problem got bigger, to the point that I was compelled to go chase it, and spending the money and investing the time and the energy, even in the earliest phases as a non-technical founder, was not just a no-brainer. Like, I had to do it. It was pulling me towards it.
So for everyone listening who's try and connect for them, you found an insight of there's a massive problem. You start navigating the idea maze, but how did it lead to this idea of corporate card tied to software? Because those two don't naturally connect, that the way to solve things is a new corporate card and software. So how did you navigate to the solution?
Good question. So a lot of my thinking was that the failure of financial technology was that it was delayed. I was getting information 30, 60, 90 days after it had happened. So that inherently was wrong from a business operations perspective. And the why behind that was because payments and corporate cards and expense management, that was the existing process. And you had multi-billion-dollar businesses that were predicated on that principle, namely Concur, and Expensify on the small business side had built really fabulous businesses up until that point on supporting and frankly enhancing kind of this 30, 60, 90 day timeline. But that did nothing for me. That didn't help me as a business owner. And so there was no genius, at least in the moment. There was genius certainly afterwards, of unlocking a new way to generate revenue, a new way to think of kind of coupling two different markets of payments and software. But for me, I was simply trying to solve that gap, that information gap of making it real time. And that was because certain users were using their personal cards and then getting an expense report and going through that convoluted process, which then took 30, 60, 90 days to go through the finance team, get approved, and finally get back to people.
So when you're in the middle of this, it's starting to get really big in your head. What were the things that you were doing? And you said you were investing your own money, but I think a lot of people look at Divvy and it just kind of blew up out of nowhere. But I think there's a lot of stuff that happened between you identifying the problem and people understanding what it was that you were building. So how did you go about actually letting the rubber meet the road?
Part of proving the process, actually, to me, in addition to the classic just reading the documentation, starting to go hire and recruit kind of initial engineers and seeing if it was feasible, was I kind of went out of order. I came up with the idea in April of 2016, and I went down to a bank manager, a U.S. bank manager here in Salt Lake City, Utah. Literally go to a corner bank, and I walked in and met with her, and I pitched her the idea of Divvy. and she was blown away. She was equally as lacking the knowledge and acumen as I was of software, but she was blown away to the extent that as a bank manager, she started making calls on my behalf because she felt that this was something so unique and special that she had to go send it up the chain. So she sent it up the chain to it got up to kind of the C-suite at U.S. Bank. And at the time, U.S. Bank was the 4th or 5th largest bank in the United States. And so from April, where I met with her, to then all of a sudden, I'm meeting with my co-founder, Alex Bean, in May. So just a few weeks after, we don't have anything built but a deck at that point. Okay. And we meet with, there had to have been, 13, 14, 15 people in that office waiting for us, significantly more than we were prepared for. And yet we walked in with the same confidence, probably a little too much bravado, and gave them the pitch that this was the future of where they needed to be headed. And if they didn't frankly partner with us, that we were going to take their wallet share. And we, prior to getting to making
with just
that,
a deck, you've just got a deck.
So
prior
walking
to
into the 5th largest bank and being like, you can come with us, or you can get run over.
But
by
the
us.
beauty and just the reality is that one of the primary, if not the primary job of a CEO is becoming and being, not becoming, is being an elite storyteller. Mm-hmm. And so before you even have the permission, like giving yourself the permission to make that type of claim, where you're not going to get laughed out of the room and where you actually have credibility, you have to be able to tell a story where every single one of them is now leaning forward, looking you at the eye and nodding vigorously in agreement at everything that you're saying.
Yeah.
And so the presentation then was predicated on convincing them that not only were we right, but that they had to work with us. Because if they didn't, oh my gosh, somebody else is going to work with us.
We're going to walk it across the street.
Yeah.
So what was the outcome of that meeting?
We walked away with a master agreement with them that had a guaranteed minimum of, some 7-figure minimum in it. And from there, that's where I started to leverage that commercial agreement into a friends and family round, into a really powerful recruiting story. Mm-hmm. In addition to the pitch, I could go and sit there and talk. I could look anyone in the eye and say, in a matter of 6 weeks, look at what we were able to accomplish because of the power of the innovation that we've uncovered.
Blake, let's real quick. There's like 2 or 3 things we got to touch on. You talk about telling a story. Don't you think it's super important for that to work is that you have to be totally converted? Like you have to be, you weren't saying stuff you didn't believe. You were leaning forward and therefore they are. So is that true? Because it can't be hand wave.
I think in the startup community, we're too quick to denigrate corporate America. They got to where they are. Frankly, most of us are trying to get to where they are, right? We're trying to make our startups
be big.
These big, massive organizations that kind of at our phase, we obviously denigrate and make fun of. What my point in saying that though, is that more often than not at those levels, their bullshit meter is pretty good. It is. It's pretty good that they're able to suss out and filter out somebody that's not authentic, somebody that's blowing smoke, and somebody that doesn't have credibility within the subject and subject matter that they're talking about. And it's interesting because I remember very vividly knowing that going into it, thinking to myself, you don't belong in that room. So how do you prepare yourself to be able to talk toe to toe with these guys that have been in the industry 20, 30 years? You have to also be able to speak with depth and breadth about the topics that they know inside and out. And that's where, just research mode, you got to get into it and you have to be able to
speak the language.
Speak the language with some element of depth there.
One thing that I think is interesting is you've got a different philosophy on how to build product that kind of flies in the face of conventional wisdom. And I've been in, pitch meetings with you early on where people were pushing you saying like, well, why don't you narrow your vision a little bit when you start out? So maybe tell us about how you thought about building, because it was a big idea, and how you thought about building versus when to take something to market and how all that worked in your mind.
Yeah, Blake, don't you just launch an MVP? Like that's what you should do, right?
Market give you feedback,
Yeah.
Why is that wrong?
So I don't think it's wrong more often than not. But so traditionally, the model that most people should follow, upwards of 99% of startups, is sell, design, build. And that's the way that you land on finally the right product that both you want to use and people want to use. And that makes go to market easier and kind of makes it all hum and work. Intuitively, I knew that one, personally, that's not how I work. That's not how my brain works. It was completely inverse for me. And even if I were to go do it again, I'd still build my next business the same way. I'm much more of an intuitive builder and designer. And I've learned that judgment is a muscle that you can build and become great at. And I believed that in my own personal judgment. And so it was build, design, and then sell for me. And so we spent two-ish years, maybe a little less, 2 years, building the product that I believed would be an immediate threat to the banks. But that's not why I did it.
Did you have pressure to launch before that 2 years?
Yeah,
and you decided not to?
Because you're burning money.
Yeah,
like
you're burning
it's
money.
Expensive.
There was internal pressure. There was external pressure to just get the product out there. But the reason why I delayed wasn't that I wanted to wait until it was a threat to banks. It was much simpler than that. Most startups are terrified of go-to-market. You're terrified of where my lead's going to come from. How do we actually find people? How do we create a top of the funnel that's even big enough so that way when we get to the core of the funnel and down to the bottom that we can convert enough customers that we're going to generate revenue? And I wanted to make that process a non-problem where go-to-market was the least of my concerns, where I'm not going to bed at night ever worried about, again, where's the money going to come from? And the only way that I knew how to do that was to make the product so good that it would functionally fly off the shelf. And so the goal that I gave ourselves internally, which perhaps is unrealistic for others, but again, I would do it this way, is that I wanted 10 out of 10 people to evaluate our product by themselves, not hear it from me, and have some element of shock and awe. Where truly like a visceral reaction when they evaluated Divvy for the first time, where they would be like, oh my goodness, why didn't I think of this? Or, oh my gosh, I gotta sign up for this or I'm gonna be in trouble. And that was an interesting way to think of it, that if somebody is demoing your product and they choose not to sign up for it and their boss finds out, are they gonna get in trouble? If not, I'd honestly suggest they haven't built something that's powerful enough. And I wanted to shift that burden to the audience. That's how we built. And it took time. And I was the internal gatekeeper as I trust, again, my own judgment. I trust it from a design perspective, from a solving the core problem and making sure that the core problem stays the core problem. And then from there on, solving secondary to tertiary problems within it. Those two things are inextricably linked: go-to-market and product-market fit. You cannot separate them in any way at all.
It's really interesting because as somebody who was involved in the go-to-market, it's funny, but early on in particular, one of the real hurdles to getting Divvy adopted was that it sounded too good to be true.
Right.
So you're talking about removing all possible friction beforehand and then going out with something that has the ability to fly off the shelf. Yeah. And it, like, I'm just saying my experience, like even in those very early days, is people would be like, wait, like it sounds too good to be true. Like what's the catch? And you'd have to convince people there was no catch. It was that good.
Yeah. And that was, months, if not years of strategizing and designing behind that. Some debates even about should we introduce, this was at the height of SaaS. So some debates of should we introduce a SaaS fee because that was believed.
Well, you originally thought you would just charge for the software, right?
Correct.
How did you learn that you couldn't solve it?
Oh, so that was one of the best parts, man. That just shows like how much of like how innocent we were in approaching all of this. I'm not a payments guy. I'm not a software guy. I guess I've been converted into one, but I had no idea what interchange even was until we got the master agreement, the commercial agreement from US Bank.
It's one of my favorite stories.
We're reviewing that document, and only in reviewing it, and I like contracts, so I'm reviewing it. I'm like, oh my goodness, they're promising
they're going to pay
money.
us?
They're going to pay us every time somebody uses our corporate cards.
And is that when it clicked that you could be free?
Yeah, that's when it started to click. But even still, there was an internal debate that you need to follow what everybody else is doing. And my firm belief, and if anything, that was probably the very first time at Divvy that I drew a line on this in the sand and had to kind of execute some CEO authority, if you will, and just make the decision that no, like for this to fly off the shelf and to remove the barriers, like Sterling said, where it's going to be free.
And again, interchange businesses now are all the rage, especially in fintechs. Like everyone monetizes off interchange. Back then, I mean, I don't know if you could if there were examples, I didn't know about them.
And this isn't again to denigrate anyone in the venture community, but more often than not, especially during the Series A, I was teaching most general partners about how interchange worked and what the take rate could be. And that's where you saw them lean in, eyes get big, and finally get convinced that, oh, shoot, this actually might be a more predictable and powerful revenue model than SaaS itself.
Well, think back then. I think Marqeta existed, but this idea of processors and interchange, it didn't exist.
It was only a bank thing.
It was a bank thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't a software thing. It certainly wasn't a substitute for a subscription fee. But the secret that you found was not only did it make it fly off the shelf, but you were making 5 to 10 times the amount of money on the same customer as like an Expensify was.
Yeah. Our ARPU was significantly larger than anyone in the competitive space, which obviously was compelling from the venture side. Let's touch on something though that you brought up, because from a fly off the shelf perspective, it's expense management is about the most boring topic on planet Earth. Like, and a personal level, there was no way that I could hang my hat or stamp, personal approval of, my legacy is going to be on an expense management business. That was just too asinine for me. But deeper than that, for it to fly off the shelf, and I would always envision myself in that 1v1 sales call of what do we like, how much disproportionate value can we provide and do we need to provide for them where they're just signing up on the spot. And it was contra to certainly many of the trends that were going on, but it was a quote that's now very well known in the venture space by Jim Barksdale of, I only know of 2 ways of making money, the bundling and unbundling of services. And if you look back at many of the cycles in technology, you'll see the waves of bundles that then get unbundled and get bundled again. During that time though, we were in kind of right in the time of unbundling, where that was in vogue and valuations were crazy and people were raising a lot of money. But it was, again, just this intuitive insight that no, our real chance to compete, if we want to steal customers from Chase Bank, from Wells Fargo, from American Express, I want to be able to go to that customer, offer them the exact same $1 million line of credit that Chase Bank is offering, and then a powerful suite of software that is just loaded. That's loaded, that they can't ignore. Again, they're going to get in trouble if they don't adopt this suite of software. And I believed firmly that if we could build that suite of software, again, from a build, design, and then sell perspective, that it would fly off the shelf. And I was willing to risk 18, 20 months building that suite of software, knowing that the monetization scheme existed. And then that would follow in short order.
And I think it's worth calling out that whenever there's a big outcome in a startup, there's a founder who is top, 1% in the world at something. And so for you, it was that intuition. One of the things, at least, was that intuition of what needed to be built.
Taste.
I think if 99 people tried to do it that way, they would build for 2 years, ship something, and then crickets, nothing flies off the shelf.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
I do. And, oftentimes I get asked by other founders, not even young ones that are, later stage, teach me what you did. And it's difficult because there was so much intuition involved there. And so typically my answer is, let's actually just talk about the problem you're experiencing, and I'll give you my insight of how I would solve that problem. Yeah. Because I can't really give you a blueprint of, frankly, what lives in my brain of how I do it.
So you launch, it starts flying off the shelf. You start, getting a lot of people who want to give you money. You start scaling. Talk a little bit about how you viewed recruiting and how you what your process was like there. And Tyler and I obviously lived the experience, but how did you think about it?
Before you answer, Blake.
That's like bait right there. That's like,
well, this is very, very important combo to have, because those who aren't that familiar with Divvy probably should know something, which is fair to say our executive team was very much non-standard. You didn't follow the playbook that other people follow. And by that, I mean hiring people who have done it before, really. You almost seem to have no fear of hiring people who haven't done it before. And I bet I've had other founders, even Ted Farron asked me this, all these venture capitalists will push me to say, like, I need to go find someone who's done it. And how did Blake figure that out? Like, talk through the philosophy.
There's two traditional philosophies. One that you just said of hire somebody that's been there before.
The adult in the room.
Yeah, you want to hire for the acumen and get somebody that can be plug and play. The other is to hire for people that are different from you. And that is still the mantra in most of startup land. And you'll hear that.
Like that complement your skills.
Yeah, they complement your skills.
Different strengths.
Give you different strengths.
Do you think that's right?
I think it is so absurd. It blows me away that in a world of such intellectual capacity that is even accepted, not even just as like, that it makes no sense that it's accepted as a norm. Because here's why. I had strengths as a founder of decision-making, of judgment, of taste. And it sounds bizarre, I guess, verbalizing it out loud, but those were inherent strengths that I had. Also, but what I valued was, and what I needed, because it's my own DNA, was a performance culture, right?
We're going to talk about that.
And I wanted people that not only were attracted to working in a performance culture, but that needed it, right? That actually brought the best out of them. So had I gone and, hired somebody instead of Sterling to be in marketing because of both their acumen and perhaps some of their softer skills, I believed that the culture of Divvy would have been fundamentally destroyed. It just would have. So what I was looking, to be more blunt, what I was looking for, and what I think most founders should look for, because as you point out many times in tweets and you have in the past, is that the statistics of success back founder-led companies, right? From big outcomes. It's founder-led companies more often than not are the successful ones. I had to be able to replicate myself. That's the tweet. I had to be able to replicate myself. So I was looking for people
that are like-minded,
that were not just like-minded, that were effectively me. Like that's what I really wanted. Right. And that has nothing to do with any of the kind of the hot button topics that, traditionally get thrown into this, but from a personality trait perspective, that were very good communicators, but that were deeply passionate, that were exceptionally competitive. And I looked for that in actually how they communicated outward in most of their social media. I looked for a little bit of kind of spiciness to an edge in how they communicated and who they were. And I knew that if I could find people that were like me, that they would also then start to push that culture in through the organization, and that performance culture, one that really prioritized excellence and true achievement of great work, that prioritized succinct communication, that I wouldn't have to worry about it if the Tyler Hogues, the Sterling Snows, the Blakely Cragans, the Casey Baileys of the world, effectively we're all the same. And we prioritize those same things.
So the principles on kind of why you think that way, I think are very clear. You wanted more you so that the culture could be a performance culture. Let's talk about how you did it. How did you, and I'll tell you why I ask. I'll have founders reach out and say, I'm looking for a new executive. Do you know any good recruiting agencies, or can you help me? And my answer to them is always, you know what Blake Murray did? He did X, Y, Z. So what did you do to recruit people?
It was my responsibility. And I reached out, cold contact.
Yeah, I've got it directly up on my LinkedIn.
Yeah,
and Sterling has his too, I think.
So to both of these and to really everyone that I recruited, I was paying attention very closely to individuals that, and this sounds bizarre, but that my mind was attracted to, that I felt almost a kinship in how we spoke, or how they spoke and how they communicated, that in reading their content, it would make me smile or make me chuckle, or, I'd be nodding my head vigorously at their opinions. And then I would cold contact them and tell them succinctly that I need you and I believe in you. And if you don't do this, you're missing out on the opportunity of a lifetime. But meet with me. And then an ask of meet with me.
Sterling, walk through the process of getting recruited by Blake. What was it like for you?
Yeah, this is wild. So I had been at a startup called Jive, and we'd sold that business. It was around a $400 million deal. I'm in the process of deciding if I'm going to move with the acquiring company to Boston, like it was a $12 billion public company at the time. So it was like very different. And I get a message from Blake that basically says, do you want to come be the guy?
Yeah.
And
because you were kind of the guy at Jive, but not the guy.
More like a lieutenant, right? Yeah. And so it's maybe a step up from that. So I meet with Blake. He's sick. He's like, dude, I get sick for 6 weeks every winter. Like, but he's coughing, he's sniffling, he's sick. Gets up on the whiteboard and he starts to show me what Divvy is. He explains interchange to me. He says, Sterling, when you go to Target and you swipe that card, Target gets $97. $3 gets split in multiple different ways. And he teaches me about interchange. Then he teaches me about what Divvy's going to be. I remember leaving that meeting and the office was crappy. There's like 15 people. Like it's nothing. But you meet with Blake, I get in the car, I call my dad, and I said, I'm going to work for that company because if I had money, I would give it all to Blake and to this idea. It's that good. I'm that convinced. And as I've
this is after one meeting.
This is one meeting. Yeah. I said, I'm in. And like in retrospect, founder power. Like that's how we've described 100%. It in the past is like you met with Blake and you had founder power. I think you raised a series A and B on that same whiteboard pitch.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
No deck, no model, no anything. And like that was my recruiting experience. How similar was that to yours?
It's crazy because it's very similar, but before I share mine, I want to call back to what Blake said earlier on the importance of storytelling.
Yeah,
that sounds like wishy-washy. No, it's storytelling so you can recruit Sterling Snow.
Yeah.
In one meeting and have Sterling call his dad and say, I'm all in.
Yeah.
And what's crazy
I think I called him in the elevator. Like I was so jacked from my meeting with Blake.
Yeah.
And I was like itching to go do it.
Yeah.
Right?
People get it when they heard Blake tell the story. Customers, employees. And if you do not have that,
investors,
you don't have a chance. And so to every founder listening, I'm just like, you've got to do this yourself and you've got to sell.
I also think the kind of person you get when you're not doing it yourself
100% adverse selection.
It's adverse selection.
Correct.
Because everyone gets 13,000 of those emails like, hey, there's a portfolio company growing 50% year over year. Want to come run, go to market. Like everybody gets those. Yeah. And the people who respond to them aren't the best.
Yeah. I actually don't even understand how a CEO doesn't believe that's their responsibility to the bitter end. Yeah, you can't surround yourself with people that are being brought in by somebody else
100%.
and expect it to be a grand slam. Because that's the expectation and actually the requirement. It has to work. And so how do you risk adjust
Can you talk a little more about what you look for? Because you said similar to you in performance and maybe some strong opinions in social media. You like the way they communicate. But there was also
the biggest one by far is competitive urgency. And it's not even close. Like above all else, it's competitive urgency, where they are, it's almost teetering at the surface of how they communicate, how even their body movements, the speed with which they talk, how do they talk about the satisfaction of their jobs or their future desires. You talk about slope a lot of somebody's career, right? Do they have the competitive desire to just do more? Competitive urgency was the single biggest thing that I looked for.
I 100% agree. I also noticed, like if you talk about Casey, she was at Uber, Sterling's Jive, I was Wealthfront, Blakely in Structure. Do you think hiring from successful companies was a part of it, or was that just more happenstance? Like, did you filter for that?
That was irrelevant.
That was irrelevant. It was all the individual.
It was all the individual. Yeah, I was looking at individual characteristics, and are they going to be able to push that competitive urgency down through the organization?
Some people who are listening might think like, yeah, you hire a bunch of people like you, and so you're friendly, which we were. We had a bunch of, strong friendships on the team. But does that make it hard to make tough decisions when you're all friends? Did you ever run into that, the downsides of hiring people that are like you? Are there any trade-offs?
Do you want to get in story mode?
Sure, yeah.
So it was more often than not, I would say the team within the team. Right. I mean, I think most organizations have that. You have a broader team that you trust, you rely on. There's kind of 20, 30 people in a much larger organization that really get the work done. And even within that, there's a team within the team. More often than not, the 4, 5, 6 of us, we not only got along, but we agreed, right? And we'd debate, but we'd get to the conclusion. And we didn't really have to do the disagree and commit thing very often, but we'd actually agree and be like, yeah, we have confidence in this, like, let's move forward. And then it was just, divide and conquer off to the races. It's interesting because there's emotions of regret here, but at the same time, it was one of the most important decisions I made at Divvy, and it was during the height of COVID. And it was specifically kind of what we're talking about, of the intersection of friendships and then needing to be an executive. And it was the 5 of us going out to lunch all the time, being great, great, great friends. And then I had a realization when it was super difficult during COVID. We had investors abandon, kind of the horror stories of investors abandoning us, even though their revisionist history would say they absolutely were not, but they absolutely were. We're thinking that, are we going to survive or not? And I had a very clear thought that I actually needed to pull away. And that was emotionally very, very difficult for me. Because I was implicitly giving up on the closeness of the friendships, because I needed to abstract myself from that and be a stronger CEO and operator. What's crazy about that is I don't believe I was necessarily weak before that, but it's the classic peacetime, wartime situation. And I needed to ratchet up a notch. And that was just the reality.
Yeah.
And even in looking back on making that decision, I would still do it again, which sounds crazy because there were trade-offs, very real ones, but it was the right decision for the business. And all of us still wanted the same outcome, which was massive financial upside. We wanted to win. We wanted to continue somehow generating momentum in an upward slope of the business during a time where it didn't make sense that we could or not. And the only way that I knew how to do that was to pull away from those relationships and start making tough calls myself.
Yeah, makes sense. Can you tell a little more about the COVID experience and maybe tell the story of no one is coming, it's up to us, and where that phrase comes from, what it means to you?
Yeah, that was obviously
how other founders should think about that.
Yeah, that was really pivotal for us. And COVID ended up being a fantastic forcing function for our business. I think it was for a lot of businesses, but
sure didn't feel like that at the beginning.
It didn't at the time. Kind of the TLDR on that one was the business within the business of Divvy, right? We have corporate cards and we have software. That's what we're selling. But the reality behind the scenes is that we are carrying a massive balance sheet. And we had a lot of money sitting of loans that we're giving to businesses.
Both on and off balance sheet.
On and off, and they have to pay that back. And there was significant concern internally at Divvy, but way more concerned by our investors that the customers were not going to pay that back, right? And that we were going to essentially lose all of our money and have to fold because they weren't going to pay it back.
It was so irrational to
so that's why I say that.
It was crazy fear.
Remember the investor emails?
It was
bullshit.
Yeah.
It's like
some of the smartest minds, and I'm sorry because I would still give them a hug or a big handshake right now, but during the face of
the world's
challenge
dead,
and difficulty, they actually couldn't nut up and just get it done. It was ridiculous. And we were showing them proof after proof after proof that, hey, it may be bad, but it's not going to be remotely catastrophic to the business.
So you were getting pressure from the investors because of the balance sheet during COVID.
Oh yeah, we could die at any moment because we're a lending business at our core.
Yes. And so where that ultimately led for us was after what felt like a long time, but likely was very compressed over just a few matter of weeks. But we were meeting with our investors essentially daily to every other day, showing them again the proof and the evidence that we were going to survive. And it was going nowhere. It was going nowhere to the extent of them saying, "Sorry, you guys are. It's not going to happen." And then my brother, who was in the Navy, it was a really crucial and important piece of advice that he gave me, and then we all used it as a rallying cry in the organization. He said, "Blake, I don't know the first thing about business, but what I do know is that you guys are a group of exceptional individuals, and look how far that you guys have come. And here's one of the sayings that we use in the Navy, and it was, nobody's coming, it's up to us," which is a rallying cry to why are you looking for somebody to come save you? You guys have all the tools, all the faculties, all the resources to figure it out, which was such a clarion call for me personally, and then for all of us. And it was a reminder to, frankly, a core ethos that I've always lived my life by, which I know I've spoken to you guys a lot about. I spoke to Divvy a lot about it, is that every single problem has a solution. There's always a path forward. Perhaps in that path, you have to take 2 steps back in order to go forward, or take on some pain in order to progress and move. But we always believe that every single problem has a solution. You just have to really think through it. And that's where we decided that screw the outside investor world. We're smart enough and we're going to figure that out. And it was a very intense bonding experience, obviously. We had to go through a riff. Part of the solution was taking a step backwards, was doing a riff, which at this point is so commonplace, it's crazy. But at that point, it felt absolutely catastrophic to the business, because these are people that you care about and you're emotionally attached to them. You've promised them a certain outcome, and here you are, you're letting them go. But it was the right move, because all of a sudden we had to do more with less, which all of us know at this point, having gone through a couple different cycles, that's where actually magic happens in the business, is when you cut the fat, you don't have bloat, and you require yourselves. Like, it is the expectation to do more with less. Yeah. Like, and you have to believe that you can. And we got to watch some pretty incredible magic happen on 2 very specific initiatives that, if we could pull them off, we all knew that we would save the business. And the long story short, and that, not only did we pull that off, but the business actually, thanks to Sterling and his team, ended up accelerating way faster. We were already growing fast as an organization, but with growth rates that were pretty asinine, actually, from there.
In going through that, and in watching you navigate a lot of that stuff, hard.
Yeah.
I mean, you were in tears when you made that announcement to the whole company. Yep. Like, that was painful. How would you talk to founders and CEOs about how to deal with those really hard moments because truthfully, you were the only person who knew how that felt. Sure, it sucked for lots of other people, but you were the only one in that seat making those decisions. How do you deal with that?
What I would say is that, to founders specifically, as an emotional advice perspective, which I've taken to heart, on both sides, it's never as bad as you think, and it's never as good as you think. The pain that you're experiencing, for us, I believe it was on a Wednesday. Before you know it, it's next Wednesday. You've gotten through it. You're focused on something else. Something else is now the main priority. You're triaging your problem solving, and that's in the past. Right. And that is just a distinct reality of both life, but certainly a professional life.
Yep. We've talked about this a bunch, but do you think one of the other superpowers, maybe Divvy had, but it came from you, was this ability to just live in the new reality? Something crazy happens, and it's almost like it's a strength and a weakness in some sense. Yeah. But you just forget about the old thing and you're into the new thing. Is that an important trait?
Yeah, I think you have to have a short memory. Both emotionally and intellectually. Mm-hmm. We spoke about it as a new normal oftentimes, and also no sacred cows, right? There was nothing so important at Divvy that it couldn't be killed if we proved that it wasn't important anymore. Mm-hmm. If it's not the most important anymore, it gets the back burner and something else is. But having that short memory is a survival mechanism. I do think a lot of us, if I'm going to be honest, and this is where people that have a big outcome, $1 billion+ outcome, there likely is a common trait where we're numb to some of that emotion. Yes, I did cry, and it was genuine, and the emotions were there, and yet you move on pretty quick, because
you have to.
It can't really drag you down.
Should we tell should we go through the acquisition through Bill.com and tell that story, or no? What do you guys vote?
Can we?
I don't know.
Me neither.
I do have a different question.
Yeah, we can pass.
Part 2.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Blake, this is an interesting one for me, because one of the things that made Divvy really special was that it was legitimately a place where you could come in as an intern and leave as a director, as a VP. And I have a half a dozen examples of that. Yeah. And that was kind of your philosophy on people with trajectory and slope, and like, hey, if you're gonna bleed for this, you always said, like, we have to answer the what's in it for me. So I'm curious how you viewed taking risks on people and allowing their careers to accelerate, but also not pigeonholing them into being like, well, you came in as an IC. I can't really see you as a director or a VP, and how you, because that was, I think, also very atypical, but it's one of the things that made Divvy special.
Well, maybe to the second part of what you're saying, which I actually think is a little more important, because I think we covered a bunch of that first one of taking bets on people, which really for me were more, I prioritized the cultural bet more than the Acumen bet.
Yeah.
I felt like, we could level up and learn together from an Acumen perspective. All that matters to me in a business. I love capitalism. Capitalism is the greatest gift from God on planet Earth. Is what have you done for me lately?
Yeah.
And I will live and die by that. And I'm an unabashed believer in that. Performance and results matter in an organization. And what have you done for me lately? And so whether or not you're an intern or at any level, as long as you're producing and leaving an obvious wake, like a boat wake, a wake of success and proof behind you, that using that same, I talked about it from a product market fit perspective, 10 out of 10 people, shock and awe, 10 out of 10 people should be able to look at your work product and it's so obvious before the promotion happens, where when you get promoted to VP, that is frankly, it's a collective eye roll of what took you so long. Why are you the idiot that took you so long to make him the VP, right? Because there's such an obvious wake of results. And that is, I think, a really beautiful, soft way of evaluating performance outside of kind of the harder, more trackable metrics per role. But that should be blatantly obvious and will always reward anybody that has a clear performance track record.
I love that. And it's very true. And in a pure meritocracy, it's just like the cream rises to the top and you don't care about anything else.
The other beauty of that is when you draw that line in the sand, in addition to recruiting the 5 to 7 people around me, okay? Because there's only so much you can do from communicating urgency and speed, but then it's actually how do you show up every single day at work? When you draw a line in the sand of a true performance culture and a meritocracy, that starts to filter out the people that don't belong. And it takes a little bit of time culturally, but then word gets out and a buzz gets out and it starts to attract the other people who opt in because they know, they believe in themselves, they want to thrive, they want to work inside of that culture. And that was obviously our story, but I would suggest that it's the story of any organization that is actually able to stay firm to a performance culture where metrics matter, results matter, and really there's no argument around that. You're going to attract the right people.
100%. And I think it's an easy thing to say. I think it's a really hard thing to live every day.
Oh yeah. There's the majority are pretenders in the startup world.
That's right.
In the tech industry are pretenders, right? They sit there and they talk about, especially right now, it's very in vogue. After 2020 through 2022, right now, it's super in vogue to talk about being performance and performance minded.
And it didn't used to be.
And it didn't. I mean, you're getting canceled if you talk about it.
Absolutely.
Screw that. But it's like you absolutely were getting canceled if you talked about.
Meritocracy was a bad word for a while.
Exactly. But I would even suggest that the majority of those that are talking about it are having a very difficult time implementing it just because of cultural pushback within their organizations. Unless they're cleaning house and starting anew.
So is that the answer? If you're trying to implement 100%. A performance culture and it's not quite working, what do you got to do?
Yeah, you got to cut bait and rehire for that. Mm-hmm. That's what I would do. Dead serious. That's what I would do.
I think it's the only way. I don't think that DNA fundamentally changes unless you actually swap out the DNA.
Well, so
Tiger doesn't change his stripes.
No, but that's actually really interesting because on the topic of whether it's that competitive urgency or more so it's ambition. Ambition is only controversial to people that aren't ambitious. That is the reality. It is only controversial of like where they look at you and like, why do you want to work so hard? Dude, I can't explain that to you if you don't understand that. You're never going to understand that. And I don't care to spend the time explaining it to you.
But so many CEOs capitulate to trying to be everyone's cup of tea, right? And it's rare for people to actually say, nope, this is who we are. This is what we stand for. If that resonates.
Can we actually draw that distinction? Because I do think in this conversation, people can take it away that in having a meritocracy or being a performance-minded, both CEO or executive or organization, that means that you have to be cold-hearted. We were such a close-knit group It was ridiculous. And one of the greatest sources of pride that truly, not even just in hindsight, but I remember I used to like message in Slack after seeing 20 people from product, marketing, and other organizations all go longboarding together. Like that was just commonplace inside of Divvy. There still was a camaraderie and a collegial attitude. And yet we still all lived and died by our numbers. Like those can coexist. And yet the frailty of the human mind is going to try to create kind of a binary environment that you have to be either or, which is just is stupid. And
that in order to accept
It's a
performance
false
culture,
dichotomy.
you're
It's a
gonna
false
be
dichotomy.
a terrible place to work.
Yeah, you're
no,
going to be right.
It's actually the opposite.
It's absolutely the opposite because again, it attracts the people that want to work in that environment.
There's two topics I'd love to have you cover, Blake. You've shared a lot of thoughts on both of these. Hope you don't mind. One is tell people more about how you think through the sacrifice that's required to build a big business in terms of maybe family time or hobbies or other things, and your time and seasons principle, and talk through that. How did you think about the sacrifice that would need to be required to build Divvy?
Yeah, so let's frame it around one of the hotter topics especially unfortunately on LinkedIn, in all
Sterling's
the greatest social media
Sterling's
platform
hometown.
ever made.
Oh yeah,
The
we got
trailer
a
park.
LinkedIn all-star over here.
He pays for his subscription. This is wild.
But it's the concept of work-life balance, which inherently isn't a controversial topic at all. It is exceptionally controversial and exceptionally stupid if you're searching for asymmetric upside in your life. If it's when you're laying awake at night at 3 a.m., you can't sleep because you envision this part of your life that you can see it, it's tangible, you can feel it. 10 years from now, this is what your life is going to look like, and it's fundamentally different from where you are. And it includes different, perhaps luxuries or different adventures. If you want that asymmetric upside, you cannot have work-life balance because you have to, first, Sterling talks a lot about this, you have to find the right company, right, to work for. Right? You have to select for company and not for role. And from a founder perspective, you have to give it your all. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because all things also have an end. And so for me, I was a CEO, a husband, and a father. Yes, emotionally, I wanted to be the best I could be at all three of them. Practically, from a time allocation perspective, some are going to get more attention than others. And I was completely at peace with that and completely okay with that. Being a CEO for that time and season was my priority because I was chasing asymmetric upside directly from a financial outcome perspective, but also maybe more romantically, more spiritually. I wanted to figure out how to tap into my potential and really like show myself who I am. And I couldn't do that without literally giving my all to Divvy, which stole from time with my wife and kids. And so practically how I did it was that I would drop the kids off at school at 8 o'clock. I'd show up at work, so not too early. I still did have requirements and obligations. I'd get home or I'd leave work at 6. I would spend about 2 hours with the kids. My kids were relatively young at that point. They'd get in bed at 8. They're finally asleep by 8:30, and then I would spend 30 minutes with my wife every night. It was from 8:30 to 9 or 9 to 9:30, whatever it ended up being, depending on the kid's schedule. It was 30 minutes of dedicated time with my wife. And then that team within the team and then the broader team, we were all online, all of us, without a requirement, but because we wanted to be there.
Too much to do.
There was too much to do. Nobody ever demanded it. It's just everybody started appearing online, working again, more often than not, probably 12:30 and 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
Right. And that's just what it took to get done. And so the idea that you can chase asymmetric upside and not be all in is antithetical to everything I know. I don't know of a singular...
Extreme outcomes require extreme sacrifice.
And it's just
people who
a fact.
say it's not, you can have one without the other, I think are lying to you.
They're lying, and it's actually the burden is on them to prove otherwise at this point.
Yeah, go do it.
Yeah, go do it, right? I'll literally actually give you seed money to go do that. I've thought of that, like the next big LinkedIn argument. Where they're like, exactly. I'll give you $3 million. I'll be on your board. I'm not going to be an antagonist. I'll actually help you, but let's see you pull it off on a 4-day work week.
Yeah.
Like prove it.
Yeah,
you know?
for sure.
All right, so this leads to one other thing. You have found entrepreneurs like Elon who are very mission driven. You know, you've been very open in saying you're not driven by some big financial fintech mission.
No.
You're driven by what? What drove you?
Well, so at that time, right? I think that can also shift based on what are your priorities at the time. To me, it was more a question of, not a question. It was a function of authenticity. I wear
you can't fake it.
I wear my emotions on my sleeve. I am who I am. I try to be a good guy. I try to kind of taper some of that energy and directness down, but I cannot fake it. And so I couldn't stand in front of the organization, whether we were 30 employees or 600 employees. I couldn't stand up there and give them a rallying cry about expense management's going to change the world. You know, that's like, it's ridiculous. And I don't understand how, you know, these payroll companies or any kind of B2B SaaS or anything can stand in front of their organization and do that. And perhaps they do. Perhaps, you know, I'm not going to speak for them. Perhaps they do feel like their mission is that important. But what I felt was more powerful, and certainly was powerful to me, was looking around the room. I think the average age was 28 with like 2 kids or something like that. We're in this together and we're going to change our lives, and let's do it together.
Financially, you're going to get people rich.
Financially, we're going to change our lives together. We've made all of you owners in a pretty material way. Yeah, and let me show you of what that does to your life if we pull it off together. And so we were very financially motivated and financially driven, and I love that about what we did because
and you feel no shame about that. That's what you wanted to do.
Absolutely zero shame about that.
Yeah.
It was such a motivating factor to grow, to be bigger, to prioritize revenue growth. Because when revenue, you see it all the time in startups, the revenue starts to become the secondary focus to other issues in the organization. Revenue was front and center because all we cared about was becoming as big as we could at that time.
Capitalism
Capitalism.
in its pure form.
Pure capitalism.
Purely.
And again, we attracted people that were drawn to that.
100%.
It was authentic for all of us.
It was.
You know?
And it was about building a big business. That was our mission, right? And changing trajectories.
We're inherently competitive. Business to me is the greatest competition in sport out there. None of us are going to be professional athletes. And yet to me, it scratches that itch of competition if you allow it to, instead of kind of dancing around that topic. And that's how we treated it. Was this is a competition and we're going to win and we're going to figure out how to win.
Yeah.
We talk about, like, let's ask this one first, actually. Who's an investor that you really admire? Because you've pitched everybody. You've met with everybody. There's not a GP at a brand name firm who you haven't talked to through the course of your time at Divvy. So, like, who do you really admire? Like, who's your favorite one?
I can only answer it one way, and it's because he means so much to me. And it's Ben Lambert, who's your colleague at Paleon. And the reason why is we both took a bet on each other. So we took that initial bet at the investment. Paleon came to me. They came with their offer. We had competing offers. They took me out to dinner. It was kind of the founding members of Paleon, all of them, and then Ben, who is junior to them. And I looked around the room, and I believe that you can reduce most success down to incentive alignment. And I looked at all of them at dinner, and I asked myself, who has the most to gain and who has the most to lose? And if I align myself with that person, they're going to have my back when it matters. And that's so I chose Ben. None of us really knew each other outside of that kind of initial dating phase at Divvy. And I chose Ben because I knew that I could make his career and that he would have my back along the way. And so that initial decision chose to be correct. And then he backed it up. So when we talked, I made fun of a little bit of investors getting afraid during Divvy. Yep. He was the only, there were two. Rebecca Liu from Insight and Ben Lambert. But Ben really showed up and believed in us, fought with us, wept with us.
Never doubted,
not even a second. So he's the one. I respect that because he acted the way that most investors profess and say they will act, and yet they don't. Not all, but at least in our instance, they didn't when it mattered.
And I think that this is a phenomenal point because you've got a founder of a $2.5 billion exit who's, again, talked to, pitched, had relationships with all of them. And the one who you would say is like your favorite, the one you admire, is is simply the one who they don't have the biggest name or the biggest reputation or the most clout.
He did what he said he would do. And isn't that a core principle of integrity, actually? Yeah. You do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
And I think, to people on the investing side, pay attention to that because that's what it takes to win the heart of a founder.
Yeah. And there's other exceptional investors, obviously, that you meet and you're impressed with who they've invested in. And again, their intellect and the diverse topics that they can go down. All I care about as a founder was who's going to be loyal to me, absent something criminal.
Yeah.
Right. Which is actually how Ben framed it to me. Absent you do something criminal, I got your back. And he lived up to that.
That's pretty cool.
How about operator, Blake? Is there another person you see who has ran a business or running a business that you're like, damn, I really admire them?
I think there's two. I think the easy answer is Slootman, because there's just such an alignment there from a performance culture and what he's been able to do there. That, when he started publishing, at least to us when we got
when that LinkedIn post came out,
it felt like we were all like, holy crap, this is what we've been living, and it felt cool to see it written out.
Yeah.
It obviously resonated with a lot of us. That's the easy answer. The one that has surprised me a little bit more, just as I've gotten to know their family, is a local one, and it's Gail Miller. I think she is
the matriarch of the state, man.
Yeah, but that's almost the title that doesn't give her enough credit.
She should get way more.
She's
than
a
that.
business savant.
One of the best.
Like one of the best, an incredible business mind and team builder. She knows where the market is going and where her organization needs to go before everybody else. I mean, again, it's a wake of success. Like, I don't know how you could dispute that.
Yeah.
She does it the right way with the community as well. And that's somebody, that whole team with her at the helm, I think it's pretty badass, actually.
It's pretty cool. So last one, this is kind of the golden spur question, but like, why are you the way you are? And we've spent, last hour or so talking about it, because Divvy was really your art form. It was the expression of the things you believed and what you wanted to accomplish. But like, what made you this way? What made you ambitious? What made you what happened?
What's driving you?
I genuinely don't even know how to answer that question, because all of this sounds so self-serving. It's just the way, it's my DNA. It's, for better or worse, it's an engine that I can't turn off when I go to sleep. When I wake up, it's the part of me that likely harms even some personal relationships because of the intensity that's there. It's the problem solver in me, where you look at it either at an individual that you're with or a group, and you're blown away that they can't see the solution. It's just so asinine to you. Like, it's just how my brain works, and I'm hardwired that way. Growing up, actually, if I can touch on that, so the saying in my family about me as like a 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old was that he's right even when he's wrong. Like, that's just it. So I've always been that way. Yeah. So, hopefully down the road into my life, I get confronted with more pressing real problems, expense management and spend management. Yeah. Like, that's not even a thing. That's not a problem. It was an opportunity to make money, which was really cool. Yeah. And it changed lives for a lot of people. But it would be really fun to tackle some of the more pressing matters. That'd be cool.
That's usually our last one. Can I ask one more?
Yeah.
On December 17th, 2021, you tweeted, "Being curious sure makes life fun. There's no doubt I haven't had my best idea, eaten my best meal, read my favorite book, or even heard my favorite song yet. It's right around the corner."
Yeah.
All of them. Why do you think that way?
By the way, this is after you've already
sold the business,
accomplished a lot, like a lot of your goals and stuff have been realized, and you're saying the best is yet ahead.
Why do I live that way? I think it's like, I'll answer that with a question of, how can you live your life feeling like you've peaked at any point? Like, what a dissatisfying life of that where you've peaked. Life to me is a pursuit. It's a pursuit of growth. It's a pursuit of betterment. Back to time and seasons. I already had my time of trying to become an elite CEO, not the best CEO I could be. What a soft, silly metric that is. Like, the world evaluates CEOs, and I wanted to be an elite CEO. That was the goal. That has shifted somewhat to okay, what does that mean to be an elite husband? What does that mean being to an elite dad? I love fly fishing. How do I actually become a top 10 fly fisher and angler in the world? Like, wouldn't that be a fun pursuit? I don't know how to live a life that isn't in pursuit of greatness. I think, to wax poetic, actually intentionally on this, where intensity and ambition may not be a choice, it is a choice for every single one of us to wake up each day and to decide to be great. Like, that is absolutely a choice that all of us can make every single day, is to be great and to actually be elite at something. And again, I'm not trying to be the best Blake. How do you be elite at something? That's a choice. And that's just how I choose to live my life.
This was a blast.
It's a fun one, man. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
So we just wrapped up. I think it's going to be our longest episode with Blake Murray.
A lot of content.
There are a lot of really good themes, but I'll ask you first. What are a couple that stand out to you, and then I'll add a few.
One thing that is very apparent to me, and maybe it's because I worked at Divvy, but it's how much of an organization really just embodies the traits of its leaders. I think every team, they exhibit the traits of the leaders, every startup, all that kind of stuff. That was a big takeaway for me. The importance of ambition, the importance of purposeful, forward-looking thinking, the importance of being able to know when you're going to differ from conventional wisdom and be right. I think the same way when we talk to Andy Ratcliffe, in investing, you make money on non-consensus and right, and that's exactly true in startups.
Yeah.
If it should have been done the same way, somebody else would have already done it that way. So you have to be non-consensus and right.
So where was Blake non-consensus?
Well, I think in terms of some of the ways that he hired.
Yep.
I think in the ways that he thought about building product, in the ways that he was comfortable monetizing in new ways, like he diverged from the well-trod path many times.
Yep.
in that discussion.
I agree. I also loved, you noticed at the beginning, he said, I wasn't sitting around trying to come up with business ideas. I had an insight.
Yeah.
I'm simplifying, but
Yeah.
that's a common theme of the podcast, is these insights come to people, usually often about problems that they have, and then they start the idea maze. And he wanders this idea maze and finds like 2 or 3 other real insights. Hey, we can make this free because of interchange. Hey, we could actually get rid of expense reports instead of make a better expense report. Like, I love the idea maze and the insights that he covered.
And I think that, Blake was a first-time founder, and I think that ability to simply tackle one problem at a time and not be daunted by the fact that you're going to have to tackle 10,000 problems. He said, every problem has a solution, and you just whack them down, one by one. And that was apparent to me throughout as well as a superpower.
You mentioned ambition. Can I tell the story of a pitch of SoftBank?
Yeah.
When I knew Blake had massive ambition.
Yeah.
Very quick story, but ambition is a key theme here. And I remember in the middle of a pitch, Blake and Sterling and I and Blakely and Alex are pitching SoftBank, and we had this slide. Remember the bubble slide? And how we were slowly going to expand across these bubbles. And I remember Blake looking at folks and saying, if we execute on this and we do well, this could be $100 billion business. And we're going to take over Amex. And anyway, he just had this massive vision, and he wanted to do it in a very quick timeline too, which to me is a form of ambition.
Yeah. Well, and what's funny is if you go back to what Blake said, he told U.S. Bank he was going to eat their lunch when all he had was a deck.
And he believed
it. So that ambition was at inception carried through, the entire time, right? So I think you have to want something, like you hit what you aim at.
Yep.
And I think ambition's a big part of that.
So another takeaway for me is there's this quote that Sam Altman says, which is, all these founders come to Y Combinator and ask us what's the secret to building a successful startup, and they want it to be something other than it is. And what it is you build a product good enough that people will tell their friends about it. And Blake, that was his theme at the beginning. He's like, I'm not going to ship it till it flies off the shelf because go-to-market needs to be solved through the product being so good.
Yep.
So I think as a founder, you've got to make sure you're being honest about, is my product actually going to fly off the shelf? Does it actually cause people to lean forward? And if not, what are we doing? Because it won't work.
Yeah, I think that's true. And you can front load a fair amount of that work by just thinking through, what could I do to reduce the friction? What could I do to make this a no-brainer so that anybody I get in front of at an exceptionally high rate is going to want to use this?
Yep.
And that is product, that's monetization, that's verticalization. There's a lot of things you can do there to improve your odds of success.
You got any others? I got one more if you don't.
Yeah, go for it.
Last one to me is this importance of, call it taste or judgment. He had, I think, really good judgment in picking the right problem to solve. He had good judgment in trying to hire people. He had judgment in surrounding himself with good investors. He had judgment on what makes a great product. And I think founders have to have great judgment. It's a series of decisions, and Blake's judgment or taste is part of what made Divvy successful.
No doubt. Fun one.
For
Hope
sure.
everyone enjoys it.